and welcome to Blast from the Past. I'm Tammy, your host. Denny's name might not stand out in your memory, but Denny has played a major role in drag racing history. Denny, how did you get into drag racing?
Well, I started drag racing with a friend of mine back in 1954, and he was a custom painter for a company out of San Francisco, and he built what we called a rail job with a flathead Ford, and we ran on nitromethane, and our home track at that time was Winters, California. And then we went on and we kept stretching the car and trying to go a little faster, and we ran Lodi, California, San Jose, Fremont, Half Moon Bay, and then I lost him and went on with my own car, went into coupes and sedans, and then I went in later on into the 1941 Willys coupes and raced with guys like Doug Cook, John Hirschfield, Mazmanian, all the Southern California guys, and some of the Arizona guys. And when I quit drag racing in 1972 or 3, I opened my own machine shop, and I started building some NASCAR stuff and circle tracked, but drag racing has always been my one love.
So when did you get started in drag racing?
1954.
1954. So back in the early days of drag racing, you didn't have the modern things that we do now.
No, but we had machine shops, and we built our own engines. Of course, we had machine guys around, different guys that were good in cylinder heads and guys that were good in doing blocks. And we built our own chassis. And I never ran a professional chassis until I met Kent Fuller, and I had a Kent Fuller car. But as a rule, we built our own cars. And we did most of the machine work ourselves, our painting, and whatever we could afford to do. Of course, nobody had any money. And a big sponsor was a $20 bill and a bag of sandwiches. And that was about it.
So where did you drag race?
Well, we had a spot out of Santa Rosa. At that time, I was working in a speed shop at Bing Speed Shop. And we raced out on the highway wherever we could find a good spot where the cops weren't around. And we did a lot of street racing, and we raced, but basically the track we ran was a half mile at Winters, California. And then we ran Lodi, which was in Lodi, it was in Kingdon, the old Kingdon strip. And we ran San Jose, and we ran Half Moon Bay, we ran Cotati, which was in Santa Rosa, Fremont. Those were basically the strips we ran. But we hung around the drive-ins, and hey, if somebody had a hot car, we would either go home and drive it down or trailer it down, and we didn't care. We raced anywhere we could race.
So the movies showing all the drag racing really happened.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, of course, we were never, anybody had a camera that would film us. We didn't want anyone around with cameras. But yeah, we did exactly what they tried to produce in the movies.
So tell me about the fuel that you used.
Well, we started out using gasoline. There wasn't a lot of additives, and then we switched over to alcohol, and then we went to 20 to 30% nitromethane to give the car a little more boost. But nobody knew anything about fuel. And I was very fortunate because I campaigned a little and hung out with John Bradley, Mr. Flathead. And John was the king of the fuel flatheads. And of course the bandits, the Bean Bandits out of Chula Vista, those guys all ran fuel. So we'd run 20% and they'd be running 80% because we didn't know anything about fuel. But basically that's what we ran, was alcohol and nitromethane.
So where were you living at this time? Where were you doing all this drag racing?
Well, I was living at that time in Santa Rosa, and I lived in a little town in the Redwoods, which we had a lot of spots we could go drag racing out there in the boondocks. But I moved from the little town into Santa Rosa, and we raced on the freeway. Well, actually, it wasn't a freeway; it was a new highway, and that's basically there. And then I moved out of Santa Rosa and I moved to Fresno, and we raced at Madera, and we raced at Hanford, Bakersfield, the old Fresno airstrip, plus any vacant street we could find. And basically that's where we started. And
Did they charge for these drag racing
oh yeah,
strips?
you could go drag racing, pull in $2, take your hubcaps off, and go drag racing.
$2.
$2.
That's great. It did cost some money to do this. Were there sponsors at this time?
Well, my first sponsor was a sandwich shop, Smitty's Sandwich Shop. And he used to give me $20 on Friday night, and it was looked like it had been ironed. And he gave me the $20, and he gave me a bag of sandwiches. And we go drag racing.
That was your sponsorship.
And that would buy a tank of gas for the old Plymouth that I towed my rail with, and be able to buy the oil and pay the $2 to get in the strip, and had a few bucks extra. And of course, nobody could afford a motel, so we all carried sleeping bags and clean towels. So somebody that had a little money that rented a room, 20 guys would use it for showering. And that was basically what we had.
Where was Smitty's?
Smitty's was on the Russian River. In fact, he had the best fish and chips of any little restaurant I ever. But he always had some special, you know, and just a super nice guy.
One of the performance items would be a camshaft.
Well, you know, it's funny because the guy that I worked for, Ed Bingley, he ran what they call the Clay Smith cams. And when I started racing, I used Eskandarian. In fact, Ed and I are still good friends. And I used the Esky, I used Prowler, I used Ingle. There was 5 or 6 different cams I used, but I always seemed to go back to Eskandarian. In fact, the Willys, flathead Willys that I run today as an exhibition car has got a 49 Merc flathead, and it's got an Eskandarian cam and all, because Esky helped me. And then when I rebuilt John Bradley's second car, which is in the museum, Ed helped me with it. So I've always kind of stuck with the Eskandarian cams.
How about carburation and crankshafts?
The carburation we ran, everybody ran Strongbergs. There was no fuel injection. Of course, some of the guys in later years used the Hilborn stuff, but we all used the Strongberg 97s, and we'd convert them to run nitro. And almost everyone in those days ran the Strongbergs.
You converted them to nitro? You yourself?
Yes.
What would that conversion be?
Well, we would go into them in all the orifices. We would enlarge in bigger jets, and so they would carry the fuel, because in an alcohol car you're using probably 40% more than you would with gasoline. So those carburetors, when you put nitro to them, they would lean out real bad. We always had leaning problems on the big end, and but all the way up until the days until I went into the Willys, we ran carburetors, and most of them were 97 Strongbergs. And whether you ran, the most popular was 3 on the flatheads. Mm-hmm. Some guys ran 4. We ran 4 in one of our cars, but some guys would run 8 of them. So, but that was the most popular of all the carburetors, was the 97 Strongberg.
I'm sure the clutches have changed a lot.
Tremendously. The first clutch that I ran, of course, was the first production that was supposed to be of the greatest. I was running at Half Moon Bay, and I had a small block Chevrolet, 1956, and I had one of Schaefer's clutches, guaranteed to 8,000, and I had a Moon foot pedal, and it was made of aluminum, and it was about the size of my foot, and about 100 feet off the line the clutch went.
Oh,
And it took out the back of the engine, broke my foot.
no. Oh, no.
And I had a pair of $12 shoes, and they had to cut those off. My foot swelled up so bad. But the only thing that saved my foot was that Moon pedal.
Oh.
It broke in half, but if I wouldn't have had that pedal, it would have probably torn my foot off. But that was my deal with the Schaefer, and then he sent me 2 new clutches.
Oh, that was nice.
And that's basically what we ran with the Schaefer stuff. And then we ran some Weber clutches. And of course today, you know, your clutches are the main thing in drag racing. And it's a high-tech situation to
Right.
build that clutch. Most of your drag teams have all got a clutch guy or two.
You're friends with Art Chrisman.
Yeah.
Give me a good story.
Well, you know, on Wednesday night we go over to Art's whenever I'm in the LA area. And I asked him something one night about drag racing. And I said, how did you get in drag racing? He said, well, my girlfriend and I were cruising. At least I think it was his girlfriend. Might have been his wife. And he said, I drove by. I pulled up and asked the guy, what's it take to go drag racing? He says, $2 and take the hubcaps off. That was my story with Art Chrisman.
Tell me about the history of the California Hot Rod Reunion.
Well, the Hot Rod Reunion is held in October. We used to run in October, in early October, but now they've moved it to a later point in October, generally the last week or 2 of October. And it's at Formosa Raceway, which is probably one of the most famous drag strips in California. And you can go there and almost see the guys that are still survived, I should say, in drag racing. We meet at the Doubletree. That's the headquarters for NHRA. They started it 24 years ago. This will be our 25th year. I've made them all. Anyone from Don Perdome to Tommy Ivo to John Bradley to you name it in drag racing, if you had a favorite and you wanted to go see somebody, that's the place to go for autographs. And when we first started at Formosa, we had a barbecue and a big swap meet, and over the years they've done away with the barbecue, but there's drag racing, Top Fuel. Now, when we first started, I would say there was 3,000 people showed up, 2,500 to 3,000. Now, in the 160 acres they have there, there's 25 to 30,000 people.
Wow.
They run everything from coupes and sedans, funny cars, dragsters, gassers, whatever you bring, you can run if it's, you know, teched and legal to run. But it's just basically 4 days of camaraderie.
Right.
We have probably 60, 70 vendors that show up.
That's great.
And it's quite a show.
Do you have a favorite drag strip?
I would say my favorite drag strip that I've ever run on was probably back in the old days. We run out at Madera, California.
Okay.
It was small. It was mostly made up of the guys from the Fresno area. And I think that was the most fun of all of it.
Madera. Never been
Madera
there.
is 14 miles out of Fresno, and Hanford is about 80 miles, 75 to 80 miles from. So those were the strips that we ran. And we ran at the Fresno airport, but they run us off.
Imagine that.
And but Madera was, when I was in Fresno, was my home track, and when I was in Santa Rosa, we ran at Cotati,
Okay.
and then they closed Cotati, and then we trailered on Lodi, and Vacaville, and San Jose, and Half Moon Bay, and we ran anywhere we could afford to go.
I was going to say, did you ever work?
I worked in a speed shop. I was very fortunate, but I only made $35 a week. But nobody had any money, but you always had a couple friends of yours that had a job, and they'd throw in $5 for gas. And, you know, we'd take our sleeping bags and some clean towels and hope somebody had a room with a shower. And that was basically what it was.
Okay. That was then, this is now. What are you doing now?
Basically, now I'm semi-retired. I do engines for some of the street racers at the Las Vegas Speedway. I do a few drag boat motors. I did a lot of circle track, IMCA stuff. Mm-hmm. And basically now I kind of pick and choose. I do my own stuff. I build a few flatheads, and I make a few car shows. I have a 1941 Willys with a blown flathead, and I make these shows and reminisce and just kibitz with a lot of guys. It's just I don't have to work. I have a full-blown NASCAR type machine shop, but it's basically a hobby shop. I had one employee who was with me for 28 years, and I'm alone now.
You do what you love still. I want to thank Denny so much for taking the time out of his day, talk about the past, about the present. We will see you next week from Blast from the Past.